Reptile Expos are a cornerstone of the reptile keeping hobby. It's where we as a community get to gather with like-minded nerds and talk about our animals, talk about our enclosure setups, and ultimately reconnect as friends, as a community. Not to mention, it's the place where most of us actually acquire new animals, whether that's because we found an animal at that expo that we're excited by, or because we're meeting up with a breeder that we've been chatting with online. Heck, of my 5 pet reptiles, 3 of them I bought at Reptile Expos right here in Ontario. I loved Reptile Expos. I went to as many as I possibly could every single year, but I never really attend them anymore. Let's talk about it. My name is Cole. This is Kaz. Welcome back to Boas and Buffoonery. A quick disclaimer before I get too deep into this topic. This is not Reptile Expo slander. I do not hate Reptile Expos. I do not think they are inherently bad. I've just noticed that over the past couple years, I don't really have a strong urge to go to more of them. I see them pop up on my newsfeed. I see people attending, and I wish that I could hang out with my friends at the expos, but I don't feel a massive draw to go to them anymore, and I just want to break down why I think that is. I still think that Reptile Expos hold a valuable place within the reptile community. I just don't want to go to them anymore. Also, I usually try to do this piece towards the end of the video so as not to take away from the message of the video, but if you guys could do me a huge favor and like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below with what sort of reptile-focused topics you would like to hear me discuss in the future, it would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much. It takes just a couple seconds. It really means a lot. With all that being said, reason number one why I think I just don't really feel like going to Reptile Expos right now is that I don't really have a great desire to bring another pet reptile into my home. I have a bunch of the animals that I would have considered my dream pet reptiles, and I'm very excited by my animals. Not to mention the fact that I see an enclosure upgrade coming for Kaz in the near future, which is going to cost me a substantial amount of money, and there's a couple other animals that I already have that I would like to upgrade their enclosures before purchasing a new animal. And it's not like purchasing a new animal is the only reason to go to a reptile expo, but it is absolutely a massive draw. And if I'm not looking to bring a new animal into my home to add another pet to my growing reptile family, and I'd have to take off either time from work or time from making these YouTube videos, it really just isn't worth it. I'm kind of busy. And as much as I'd like to hang out with other members of the reptile community more frequently, I think there are other ways that I can do that. I've also been able to connect with the reptile community through these videos in a way that feels really special, and I want to continue to grow this. A little peek behind the curtain, if you will. The day off I have during the week from work that I use to film these videos and largely edit them is Sundays. And Sunday would also be the day that I would usually take off to go to a reptile expo. So along with my lack of interest in bringing home a new animal, I also just don't really have the time. Another reason why I'm not feeling myself drawn to attend these reptile expos right now is that, at least in my area, they are heavily focused on morph breeding. There are hundreds of tables covered in a bunch of different morphs of generally sort of the same few species, and I'm just not particularly interested in morph breeding. I'm not particularly interested in morph animals. And I used to be. When I was 14, 15, getting into the hobby, it was one of the things that drew me to reptiles in the first place was the cool paint jobs that breeders could give to these animals. And don't get me wrong, there are some absolutely stunning morph snakes and morph lizards that are perfectly healthy and make incredible pets. Right off the top of my head, the one morph that I always think of is like maybe the pinnacle of like beautiful morph breeding that is incredibly healthy is IMG Boas, the increased melanin Boas, the Boa Imperator that is jet black and looks like an oil slick. I think they're one of the most beautiful pet snakes you could possibly keep. But the idea of keeping morphs just does not excite me enough that is something that I'm interested in seeing tables and tables of. Not to mention that along with the healthy morphs that have been proven over generations, there are lots of morphs being bred that either we don't know how healthy these animals could be, or we know for a fact they are not healthily bred. and could cause problems for that animal. I have friends that love morphs. I have a really, really good friend who I go herping with, and he is maybe my closest friend that I regularly talk about reptiles with, and he loves the morph world. He'll send me pictures of these crazy, wild morphs, and I can objectively see that they're interesting, but they don't excite me in the same way something like different localities in the wild looking different would, or just different species within a genus. For example, if I saw two snakes at a table and one was an albino yellowtail cribo, I would say that's really cool. That's really exciting. But if another table had just a regular yellowtail cribo and then a different Drymarchon species, I would be way more interested in the different Drymarchon species, or even just different interesting large colubrids that live similar lives in different parts of the world, like a king rat snake from Asia. I am absolutely obsessed with learning about reptiles' natural history, and I think comparing similar species and similar localities that live slightly differently or have evolved slightly different hunting or hiding strategies is more exciting to me than what we can produce in sort of a lab-like setting in captive breeding. That's not to say that all morph breeding is bad. I really don't think that it is. It just doesn't excite me in the same way that localities or species do. Unfortunately, the extreme end of this is I do feel a sort of moral and ethical dilemma looking at tables and tables of animals that I know are filling up rescues. When I see 30 tables of morph ball pythons or 30 tables of leopard geckos and crested geckos that I know are likely to end up either just going to another breeder to create another funky looking morph, or they're going to end up in a home that is ill-equipped for that animal and eventually end up in a reptile rescue or get rejected by a reptile rescue, I do feel just a little sad. So many times I go to an expo looking for the community, looking for the conversation, looking for a bunch of people who are excited about taking care of their pet reptiles. And those conversations are absolutely there, but while I'm approaching those conversations, I have to walk by tables and tables of leopard geckos and ball pythons that reasonably probably aren't going to sell other than to other breeders. These are animals that are going to either get left behind in breeders' tubs, they may get dumped off at rescues, or unfortunately many of them are going to be culled because they just don't fit in the breeders' plans, and those breeders don't have space for them. And it's a real slap in the face at a reptile expo. You really can't avoid seeing it because reptile breeders are incredibly important and incredibly valuable to this community. There are species that we would not have access to in this hobby if it weren't for the reptile breeders that produce them. All of the reptiles, in fact. But at the same time, there are a handful of species within this hobby that are straight up overbred, and we need to stop producing them. Maybe not altogether, but we at least need to slow it down dramatically. I am thinking ball pythons, I am thinking corn snakes, I am thinking leopard geckos, crested geckos. These are animals that live a really, really long time, and there are so many of them in the hobby that it makes it hard to imagine a world where they are all receiving the care that they deserve. On a bit of a lighter note, another reason why I don't think I'm all that interested in going to reptile expos right now is that I have terrible impulse control. I mentioned earlier that I'm not looking to bring any animals into my home right now, and that is true, but if I saw something real cool at a reptile expo, that could persuade me to change my mind, and that's part of why I've been avoiding them, is that I am not good at seeing something that I am obsessed with and stepping away from it. And that's actually exactly why I brought Kaz out for this particular video. I have been obsessed with the Drymarchon genus for a good few years now. I think they're absolutely phenomenal animals. I think they're so stinking cool. And the last reptile expo that I went to, I went with my girlfriend, and we had planned to bring home a carpet python. I've told this story before. It was actually the second or third reptile expo that we went to with the intent of bringing home a carpet python, but I saw Kaz. I did not think going to this expo that I was going to find a yellowtail cribo. I didn't think it was a reasonable possibility. I had reached out to basically every breeder that I knew of that produced any of the Drymarchon species, and they said they weren't going to be at that expo, or they didn't have a clutch this year. So I went in with the expectation to not find a Crebo, but I had made sort of an offhand joke to my girlfriend saying, hey, if we find a Crebo, I'm going to get it. And sure enough, at one of the distributors' tables, they had a clutch from a breeder, or at least that's what they claimed, of yellowtail Crebos, and I met Kaz, and I immediately fell in love. To this day, he is one of the coolest snakes that I own. I think he is absolutely spectacular. They are such a fascinating, such intelligent species of snake, and I think they're so rad. And reasonably, I was prepared to take care of a Crebo. We had an enclosure ready to go that would work for Kaz as a baby, and I did have enough knowledge of the species, of their natural history at the time, that I was confident I could take care of Kaz throughout his entire life. But that doesn't change the fact that taking him home that day was absolutely an impulsive decision. I didn't expect to see him, I saw him, and I took him home. And I can see a similar situation happening again. I've already mentioned that in the not so distant future, I would be interested in bringing home a tokegecko. And if someone had produced a clutch of tokegeckos and I showed up to an expo and they were there, I think genuinely I would have a hard time not bringing one home. So I'm not going to the expo. Another reason that I wanted to bring Kaz out is I actually have my doubts that he is truly captive bred. The distributor that we purchased him from ensured us that he was, and that they knew the breeder, but they did not give me names. And at the time, I think I glossed over it because I wanted to, and in hindsight, that was probably a mistake. I should have insisted that I connect with the breeder before taking Kaz home. So while he could very well still be a captive bred animal, and his temperament would suggest that he is, I don't know that for sure, and that's a mistake on my part. That is a decision that I made selfishly that I should have taken more time to consider. And that is another issue with Reptile Expos, is that not every vendor, not every breeder is going to be 100% truthful. Because even though these are largely people who love animals and love reptiles, they are also there to pay their bills, which I don't blame them for, but I do blame them for being dishonest in that pursuit. I understand they need to make money, but you should be transparent and upfront when you're vending at a Reptile Expo, and you should insist on the person you are buying an animal from at an expo as a purchaser that they do that they hold to that standard. And yes, I mentioned impulse control when buying Kaz, but I also showed pretty poor impulse control when I brought Urza home, because similarly, that was another expo that we had planned on going and buying a carpet python, and I saw a beautiful clutch of Suriname locality red-tail boa constrictors, one of my favorite snakes in the world, and I immediately put a deposit down. We still had a conversation about whether or not this was a good idea and whether or not we could take care of her throughout her entire lifetime, and I know enough about the species that it wasn't a matter of I don't know if I can take care of the animal. So again, it was impulsive, not detrimental to the animal level of impulsive, but it was a very quick decision. I mean, you could just ask the guys at my local card game store about my impulsive decision making, and they would all corroborate that story for me. And that's kind of the final reason why I've been avoiding Reptile Expos recently. It's largely due to my own behavior and my lack of good impulse control. So if I don't put myself in that situation, it's going to be a lot easier for me to not bring home a new animal or just spend a ton of money on an enclosure for one of my current animals, which is something else that I could absolutely see myself doing at a Reptile Expo. But when will I go back? Because at the end of the day, I still really love Reptile Expos for the simple fact that I love connecting with other members of the reptile community. Well, one reason that I might go back to a Reptile Expo is if I have been chatting with a breeder for some time about an animal that they've produced, and the best way for us to meet up is at a Reptile Expo. At that point, I would very happily go to that expo, acquire that animal, and move on from there and enjoy the rest of my day surrounded by people that I love being around, which are members of the reptile community. But the other thing that would absolutely bring me back to Reptile Expos would be a bit of a shift of focus. I think that Reptile Expos are way too focused on being sort of a place where people buy animals. And while I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, I don't think it's the best thing for Reptile Expos in the long run. I think what would bring me back to Reptile Expos is if we had more educational presentations at them. If we had more vendors that weren't selling animals, that were selling interesting products for your animals, or that were selling enclosures, or selling enclosure backgrounds, or selling enrichment toys for reptiles. I think that would be really cool. If the focus of expos was more about bringing in speakers and experts in the industry and experts in the reptile world, bring in conservationists from around the world, I think that would be really cool. I think that would make me much more interested in attending a reptile expo without wanting to go to buy an animal. I just think that reptile expos, weirdly enough, have a lot of untapped potential. I think that there is a lot of room to grow as a hobby through reptile expos that are not being utilized because it really just seems like a big vendor meet and greet for people who are selling animals. Which, again, I don't think is necessarily bad, but I think it leaves a lot to be desired. Let me know what you guys think down below. I'm interested to hear what your take is. Why do you still go to Reptile Expos? Or if you're like me and you've kind of stepped away from it a little bit, what was the thing that took you away from Reptile Expos? Let me know what you think down below. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, an awesome rest of your week, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.